Hi everyone. I'm sorry it's been a while and I promise it should get better now. Just so everyone knows, I'm finishing my last class today for my bachelor's degree in English, so I'm so excited for that. And after that, I should have much bigger breather room and being able to do more stuff, which would be so amazing because I have so many different ideas of other YouTube things that I can do besides reading books, even though that's going to be one of the things I will still keep up. Okay, so let's see how far I can get into this Helen Keller book because we only have about that much left to go. You guys can see it. So I don't know if I'll be able to finish it right now. I'll probably get 2 chapters in. Let's see where we can go. Okay? All right, here we go, and I hope everyone's enjoying the book so far. I really personally do like the Helen Keller story. I think it's just pretty amazing how she can communicate with people, the way she can communicate being deaf and blind. I just think it's amazing. But anyways, here we go. Chapter 7, Years in New York. The door of Perkins School had slammed shut, but another door opened. Annie learned about a new school for deaf children. 2 men, Dr. Thomas Humason and John Wright, started the school in 1894 in New York City, and it sounded perfect for Helen. But how would the Kellers pay for it? Helen's father had fallen on hard times. There was no money to spare. Fortunately, Helen had met many rich people, such as Dr. Bell, John D. Rockefeller, and John Spaulding. Spaulding offered to pay for Helen's schooling, so Annie and Helen left for New York. There's a picture. They settled into a fine house close to Central Park. At the Wright Humason School, Helen studied arithmetic, still her least favorite subject, English literature, which she loved just like me, American history, French, and German. I also know some German too. I like German. I've always wanted to learn, going off subject here, I've always wanted to learn all the languages of the world, and I know that probably will never happen because there's just so many of them, but one day I would love to learn at least as many as I can because I think it's so much fun. She also studied lip reading and speech. Helen's fame spread. A reporter from the New York Times came to interview her. He thought he would meet a quiet, shy girl, but 15-year-old Helen amazed him. Throughout the interview, Helen laughed, joked, and flirted. Helen and her class visited the Statue of Liberty. She climbed to the top. To Helen, the air at the top smelled cleaner. The smell of the ocean reminded her of Cape Cod. Another time, Helen's class went to a dog show at Madison Square Garden. Helen loved it because dogs were her favorite animal. One trip affected Helen greatly. Annie and Helen went to the Lower East Side. This is where many new immigrants lived. They lived in tiny, crowded apartments and buildings called tenements. As many as 10 people lived in one small, dark room. Sorry, I forgot to show the pictures. Let's see here. Helen could not see the poverty, but she could feel it. The people's clothes felt rough and ragged as they brushed Helen and Annie in the street. Helen also smelled the machine oil, the sawdust, the street dirt, and the salted fish. She could tell just how different life here was from hers. Tenements? Many famous people lived in New York. At a party, Helen met Mark Twain. Twain had written The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and Tom Sawyer. Twain watched Helen read lips. They talked together at the party. When Helen left, she put violets in his buttonhole. The two became lifelong friends. After school, Helen liked going to the Central Park. On wintry days, Helen went bobsledding. She took riding lessons. Helen was growing up. She was becoming a beautiful, interesting young woman. It's pretty cool. All right, I'm just going to see how long the chapter 8 is real quick here. Okay, we can read one more chapter. Let's do this. Chapter 8, Cambridge Years. In the early 1900s, few women went to college, and no deaf-blind woman had ever completed college, but Helen was determined to be the first, and she knew just where she wanted to go, Radcliffe. It was the sister school of Harvard University just outside Boston. Radcliffe was considered the top women's college in the United States. It would be an amazing accomplishment for Helen to become a student there. Helen learned of a way that she could gain admittance to Radcliffe. There was a school, the Cambridge School for Young Ladies, that prepared young women for Radcliffe. Annie went to see Arthur Gilman, the head of the Cambridge School. She pleaded with him to take Helen as a student. Surprised by the request, he said that he would think it over. Helen and Annie had no choice but to wait. His answer would determine Helen's future. It was during this time that Helen's father died. Helen wanted to rush home for the captain's funeral, but her mother wouldn't permit it. It was summer when many contagious diseases thrived in the South. Helen's mother did not want to risk Helen's health, so Helen had to stay in the Massachusetts and grieve for the captain. Then at last Gilman gave his answer. Helen was accepted. For the first time, Helen felt afraid of going to school. What if she did not do so well as the other girls? What if she failed? At first, Helen seemed like any other student at the school. She and Annie lived in Howell's house, one of the dorms. Helen made friends. Some of the girls learned the manual alphabet so they could talk to Helen. She joined them in games and took long walks with them. Helen studied English, history, Latin, and German. But few of the textbooks were in Braille. Annie had to read each one to her. Annie also had to look up words Helen did not know, even if the words were in German or French. Helen worked very hard. There's the picture. She studied day and night. Helen wanted to finish school in 3 years. She was working too hard. Most students spent 5 years at Mr. Gilman's school. Stubborn as always, Helen refused to back down. The constant studying took its toll. Helen became ill. Her sister Mildred now also attended the school. Mildred noticed that Helen seemed weak and was always tired. Mrs. Keller became alarmed. Was Annie pushing her daughter too hard? Mrs. Keller met with friends of Helen's. Should she take Helen away from Annie? Mr. Gilman thought so. Helen and Annie had been together for almost 10 years. Wherever Helen went, Annie did too. Perhaps it was time for Helen to make a break with Teacher. Helen did not want Teacher to leave. Helen felt she would be lost without Teacher. Mrs. Keller wavered. She was not sure. In the end, Mrs. Keller sided with Annie. Helen would remain with Annie. Helen withdrew from Mr. Gilman's school. She and Annie went to live in Wrentham, Massachusetts. There Helen worked with a private tutor. Nothing would stop Helen from entering Radcliffe. In June 1899, Helen took the tests for Radcliffe. She was already 19 years old. Many freshmen at Radcliffe were only 18. Helen was afraid that she had failed. But she passed with good marks. Finally, on July 4th, 1899, the acceptance letter came. The fireworks for the holidays seemed to be just for Helen. But the dean of Radcliffe suggested that Helen wait a year before entering. To Helen, that seemed like forever. In September 1900, Helen entered Radcliffe as a freshman. In the wonderland of mind, Helen said, I should be as free as another. Helen's dream had come true. All right, I will be back to finish the book next time. All right, have a good night. Bye. Oh, and then there's one helper, and here's my other helper somewhere. Where is she? There she is.
My name's Paige, and this guy is a boy, and his name is Che.
Yes.